Unscripted, unrehearsed, welcome to Talking Element. Welcome to episode 2 of Talking Element. Thank you so much for joining us. Tonight we are talking about Acts week 35, except for these change. And before we begin, I wanted to ask you, Aaron, when you were writing Acts, did you have a constant kind of thought or prayer for this series that you were hoping that we would, as a church, grow into?
Well, what I wanted Acts to do is help us to understand that we live in a culture that doesn't always understand Christianity or who we are or the things that we think that are just normal and given. That we need to be able to look outside of ourselves to the words we use and the phrases we say and how we do the things that we do. And it was important for me to maybe get people to understand that we are missionaries where we are, exactly where we are, so that we'd be learning to live that way a little bit more.
So let's jump into today's message. Can you give us just a quick recap of the main point of the sermon?
So this week's message is titled, Except for These Chains. That's actually some words that Paul says to King Agrippa. Now, he says that because there are two things that Paul had done or allowed in his life that would put any Roman official off their game. And one of them is the resurrection that Paul speaks about. The resurrection had so changed Paul's life that Paul ended up in a place of chains for the message of the gospel. And so we kind of look at what those two things are, the resurrection and the chains, how that affected Paul's life, and then maybe in our own lives, some of the chains that we have that might put other people off, but actually speak more of the grace of the gospel than we can ever imagine. That was good.
That was very good. That was very good. He's very understanding that there's kind of two things that might prohibit them from trusting and putting their faith in Jesus. And some of it is the big kind of theological aspects of who Jesus is and what he has done. And that can be a huge stumbling block of not understanding. And then there's the personal of okay, there's this Jesus guy, but then this Paul who's a follower is in these physical chains. He's a prisoner. And so I love that.
Why do I want to follow if that's what it gets me?
Right, exactly. If that's the example, what are we talking about?
You think God loves you? Have you seen what's happening in your life right now?
So exactly, and that's very real, I think, for us today. Of what are kind of the bigger theological things, which I think is the heart of the question in the middle of the message that you posed. In our world, what things do people find most hard to accept about the call of Christianity? Resurrection, I think, is still one today that people struggle against. I think, is God good? Another one.
Right.
When there
Isn't that always the question people have, though? What if God's so good? Why do bad things happen in the world? That
one
seems
of the biggest ones.
When people go always with that, rather than seeing the results of things in the world as man's sin doing all this crazy stuff, and God still doing things to bring redemption and beauty out of those horrible things that we do. Like Joseph's life. Joseph, when he gets sold into slavery, and God uses sin in every situation in Joseph's life to bring Joseph to the point where he could use Joseph to save the world.
Do you think some of that's a failure on our part, our being the church, the American church today, of not sharing or doing a good enough job of telling the stories of the beautiful in today?
I think it's probably, I'm sorry if you want to answer, I'm just jumping here. I think a lot of it just has to do with being human. Because of the nature of our lives, I think we have a natural tendency to think everything revolves around us. And when we get that way, we get so myopic that we don't even want to understand the larger story when it's staring us directly in the face. And I think that's part of the church's job, like Paul, telling the story. This is the big thing of what God is doing. You thought you were killing Jesus, but instead the King of Glory rose from the grave. That's kind of the big things behind that. You think you're doing this, but God is weaving it together for his glory and our good.
Nick, do you have any examples of things that people today, including believers, have wrestle with and have a hard time accepting?
I think just people either inside or from the outside looking in they're seeing a people problem, a hypocrisy problem, as if, well, you Christians are supposed to be perfect. and you're not. So this is not real.
That discussion came up this week, by the way, didn't it? Yeah.
We're all really crummy, and like it doesn't make a difference whether I'm held to a higher standard, but you're held to that standard too. You just don't know about it. It's like, no, we're all pretty bad, and that shouldn't keep you out. But like you're saying about he's working it all in for good.
Christians on the inside are like going, we're all jacked up.
I have a buddy who I will continually ask, yeah, people suck. Like, but do all the examples you have of how bad Christians are change who Jesus is? And because if not, then we can stop talking about every failure of every person in the church, because that list will never end. So transitioning into the more of the physical chains, and probably the more personal, where it's seen and borne out in relationship. I wanted to ask you guys, what chains have you wrestled with that God has used to reveal more of himself and more of your need for a savior and king in your life?
I would say right now a perfect example for almost every believer is how we deal with COVID. Because we start to get so frustrated by being separated from other people, and when you're not, is it 6 feet, or can I talk to your hand? And it starts to grate on everybody. I think if you look at almost everybody in the world right now, we're all on edge because our lives aren't quote unquote normal. Our lives are in forced separation from other people. Today, I'm just in a bad mood this morning. No, not a bad mood. I'm just in a mood of wanting people to get things done. So I start getting on people's cases to get things done, but not in a great way. I wish you were as I am without my chain of COVID.
I struggle to give like a direct answer to it, because I don't want it to sound like this is what I've gone through, so I'm better. So like, you haven't gone through this. You haven't walked.
My chain is that I'm better than you.
You haven't walked as far as I have. You haven't been as much as I have. Like, I don't want to, with what I say, like, I've dealt with dying family members, or infidelity, or not having the best job, or being in a office situation where they know I'm the Christian, or like, to come out of that, or just going through relationships and just hardships and coming out on the other side of that, all the while knowing like he has me. And I wish I didn't go through all of those things. Yeah. And he's built me into who I am today. So I don't want to say like, I can certainly say like he did, I don't want you to have to go through everything I did. Which is how we teach our children. It's like, please don't go through all that stuff that I did. Just try this. Just be loved and love Jesus, and just know who you are. But man, if you can avoid half the stuff I did, you would be far better off. I know it.
So I think for me, one of my chains is consistent throughout my life, not necessarily right now, although it could be perceived that COVID makes it worse. And probably oddly enough, it's been the opposite. But one of the chains in my life has been loneliness, like this constant drum in the back of my head of loneliness. And there's deeper levels that probably I could dive into of worthiness and feeling unworthy. And I think part of it is being single, but I think a lot of it is some loss of friends in life or whatnot. And really, you talked about what it's taught me, and if I look back in the last decade or so, I really think God has used it to help me understand the call and need of a community around me, of a gospel-centered community that isn't just like-minded, but it is people who are working hard together for the sake of something bigger than us. And I think for me, a passion has been grown. And I think as time went on, understanding the gospel, understanding resurrection, understanding my need has birthed a desire for others to know and put their faith in. And so when Paul says, I wish you would understand and have faith like I do, these are my words, paraphrasing, that except for these chains, like like that's been a huge part of it. And the loneliness has been kind of a side thing for me. Like I'll push hard for gospel communities for people feeling connected, because I can understand that God calls us into a family, and that has changed me, and it has changed my perspective over the long haul that I didn't have a decade ago. I didn't have on my own, or I think I just want a spouse or a wife, and that will make me complete. And truth is it doesn't in and of itself. Like it is solely when it's centered on the person and work of Christ.
I think it's so cool that you see that he has put you wherever he's put you, and not for your comfort, but for your benefit. Not that it's super fun to be in the situation that you're in, feeling how you have been feeling, but all the growth that has come because of that loneliness, because of your learning, specifically in the last 10 years, the last decade that you're talking about, that you can look back at reflection, that you can reflect back on your looking at you and see how you have changed because of that, but that you can learn from yourself, reflecting on yourself, I think is pretty awesome.
At one point in your life, it would have been, oh, the grass is greener over there when this happens, and that's no longer true anymore. And some people, on the other side would be like, no, the grass is greener where you are. But I think instead of looking at the grass as greener, you've come to a place now, understanding what the chain is, of wanting to learn the contentedness of the season God has you in where you are. And it's like we talked about in the last talking element. It's like, who do we talk to when we don't see growth, or how do we find it? And that's why you talk to other people, because other people see it, the difference in the contentedness. And not that you're fully content, and not that it's like, yay, great for me, but that God has taught you something through the midst of it that maybe you didn't want to learn, but you are learning.
Grass isn't green anywhere, I think, is what I've learned over the years.
Well, in California, it's all brown and on fire right now.
All orange at this point.
Yes.
So you ended, Paul talking about asking, do you want to experience it? And this question of have you experienced this freedom of Christ, that Paul is the freest person in the room despite being chained down and on trial. And so I always like to end these practically. So if someone is watching this and they're feeling very weighed down by chains, and they want to experience freedom, it may not be freedom from that situation, but what would you recommend that they do, or they pray, or how do they approach becoming more free?
Well, I think the first thing that you would need to do is recognize what your chains are. Because sometimes we hide from it, we don't want to see what it is, and sometimes we identify something as our chain, and that's not it. It's something actually deeper than that. And so that's, again, where we talk about gospel communities, where you meet and you talk to people and try and help get others to identify those chains so you can see what it really is.
I didn't want to interrupt, but if you can get with somebody, reach out to Connected Our Element. I mean, just reaching out to somebody and saying, this is the situation I'm in, maybe, and have somebody help you identify your own chains. That's been a huge help for me, of just saying, okay, this is not where I want to be in my life. Let's talk about this, specifically with the person that is preventing you from continuing down, wherever your roadblock is. Talk to that person, and if that person is yourself, then you should probably get somebody to talk about you with you.
I was thinking about James, and James says, consider it joy. He's talking about considering joy, like what does it mean? Why can we be joyful? And then ultimately, I think joy, the feeling more or less, comes out of that. But I think for me, like thinking outside of myself, yes, we all have chains, but thinking of the one who is bigger and better than us, God, I really think has helped me in my life not have a pity party as much, because Christ came. He's experienced worse than I have, and hopefully ever will, for sure. But I can have joy in that. Anyways, thank you both for your time. I really appreciate it, Nick and Aaron. It's been fun. And thank you again for watching. We hope that this conversation has helped spur some thoughts on for you. Like last week, we encourage you to spend some time reflecting these questions and the additional questions in the sermon notes, as well as take it to the Father. Pray for your chains. Ask Him to help bring those alongside of you who can speak truth into your life, who can help identify your chain, the chains that you have, as well as are willing to walk alongside of you with them, whether the chains ever depart or not from your life. Yeah, I've been blessed by this conversation, so I thank you guys, and we'll see you next week. Yeah, we're good. We're good. Okay.
Loneliness. That can't be it. That can't be it.
Oh my goodness.